first sitting of the House. Oh, thank you very much. So a bit about who we are. So we're from the group Assemble. We helped convene the first sitting of the House of the People last summer, and and this forum is basically a space to support one of the key demands that came out of that citizens' assembly, and it was the highest voted demand in the People's Charter. There was 96% of the participants. These are regular people. They voted to end support for genocide. This is an accurate snapshot of the UK, of Britain and Northern Ireland, and it reflects basically a true representation of what the people of this country would like to see over the current policies of Parliament. And that is, I mean, to be specific, and I quote the People's Charter, to demand an immediate and total embargo on arms, trade, and support for all other countries that are in violation of international law, with an immediate priority to be given to Israel. Um, and you may also be wondering why we have brought these particular remarkable people to be heard in this session. And it's not just because we want to listen to those who are actually doing things and trying in a meaningful way using nonviolent intervention of all different kinds to bring about an end to our complicity and our participation as a country in the worst of these criminal acts, but also because the spirit and the foundations of the House of the People, one of the foundations is to protect protest. And we see our lords and our politicians impose prison sentences and terrorist charges in complete contempt of the courts. And the House of the People is built on a memory and a history of people improving democracy and taking action to demand that their voices are heard. And 100 years ago it was the Chartists, it was the suffragettes, and today it's some of the people on this call, and we're really, really grateful to be graced by your perspective. So thank you. So I'll pass first to Sam for a moment to provide a little bit of context on the whole of the situation. Go ahead, Sam.
Makes sense. So we are still witnessing mass atrocities unfolding in real time, with governments and corporations continuing to arm, fund, and enable extreme war and genocide around the world. I'm pretty sure you are aware of this. The systems meant to protect life and human rights are failing us really bad. We're witnessing an apartheid state committing genocide in Palestine. Reports from Bradford University from late 2025 indicate that Israel has dropped over 200,000 tons of explosives on the Gaza Strip since the 7th of October 23, which has been equated to approximately 13 to 14 atomic bombs of the scale of those dropped on Hiroshima. Over 72,000 Palestinians have been killed in the last 3 years alone, with over 172,000 injured, according to reports from March 26. And almost 60% of Gaza's population have lost their homes, with more than 1.9 million Palestinians internally displaced. UN reports indicate that approximately 70% of those killed are either women or children. So Israel passed a landmark death penalty law in March. The law marks death by hanging as mandatory sentence for Palestinians convicted of opposing violent threats to Israel. And then we've got the UN's Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, has been a leading voice for Palestinian liberation against the genocide. She argues that the genocide is internationally enabled crime facilitated by at least 63 states, with the United States cast in the leading role, providing military and political cover. She has called for suspension of Israel's credentials at the UN, along with an arms embargo and sanctions. However, the US government has responded to these calls by imposing sanctions on Francesca, accusing her of being unfit for service due to her cooperation with the International Criminal Court. So, of course, Palestine is not the only country under attack right now in the world. The UN and international monitors have identified the global surge in state-led lawlessness and mass atrocities characterized by active genocide and ethnic cleansing, such as Sudan, for example, remains the world's largest humanitarian and displacement crisis, crisis with the UN confirmed hallmarks of genocide in Darfur. Meanwhile, we've got Syria under the genocide emergency following reports of coordinated campaigns by new transitional governments and Turkish-backed militias to destroy Kurdish populations in Rojava. And UN experts have formally condemned the joint US-Israeli strikes on Iran and the military incursions in Lebanon as unlawful wars of aggression that flagrantly violate the UN Charter. So finally, legal scholars and UN bodies have cited the US military abduction of the Venezuelan president as a grave and I can't say that word, breach of international law, essentially. So we've got basically international law being scrapped left, right, and centre. That's what we're seeing right now. And that's probably why you're here tonight. And we're focusing in on part of what's going on specifically in Palestine. But obviously, it's so interconnected and there's so much going on that, yeah, I have to, call out some of those key different places happening all over the world. What else to say? Meanwhile, despite high public support for a full embargo, the UK government's actual policy has been very small. In late 24, the government suspended 30 out of 350 arms export licenses to Israel, citing a clear risk they could be used in violation of international humanitarian law. The good news is the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, announced a total arms embargo in Israel to stop the genocide in Gaza. Spain reinforced its support for the Palestinian Authority with €2 million contributing in October to prevent the financial collapse. It also withdrew its ambassador from Israel and subsequently closed its airports to US planes involving in the Middle East strikes and imposed a ban on imports from illegal settlements. So we know it's possible to hold up international law. The other good news is people are rising like never before. Millions of people have participated in global protests around the world, taking direct action all over the place, calling for an end to the military oppressions in Gaza and the cessation of government support for Israel. Tonight, we're here with 6 brilliant people speaking truth to power despite state repression. I'd really like to welcome them to speak. So we've got Angie Zelter, Huda Ammori, Rowan Saudi, Shel McDonagh, and Leigh Evans. We'll hear from each of them before hearing their thoughts and a few different questions all together afterwards. Now I'm going to pass back to Yas.
Yeah, now, I mean, our first speaker tonight, some of you maybe know, was to be Salah Akram, who's a 24-year-old from Rafah. He's currently living in Palestine. I've spoken to Salah. Unfortunately, I have to tell you, he isn't able to join us tonight after all. It's sort of unimaginable, isn't it, what he's going through? Since October 2023, he's lost his home, he's lost his uncle, Saeed, 4 of his closest friends, Muhammad, Abdullah, Ahmed, and Ibrahim. He's still in Gaza, he's still living through it. His father isn't well and needs help that seems impossible to find. And it takes a lot to come to something like this, frankly. And he was aware even of the risks. He volunteered to speak, actually. But now what we've decided to do is to read a couple of short passages from his book entitled Between Life and Death in Gaza. This book is about the destruction of his home, Rafah, the nights of displacement. It's about the starvation that he's witnessed, the people who've been lost. He describes it as both a series of stories of steadfastness, as well as a screaming record on paper. And we are reading it because we believe that we need to be grounded in the real world impact of our government's illegal political choices, because the voices of Palestinians are far harder to get out there into the world than the voices of many other people who have a take, let's say. Salah is not some sort of well-known author. He has made some connections with some organizers in the Netherlands, and there's a way of reaching out into his book, but he's not got many connections here in Britain. So I'm going to read certain sections of his book towards later of the call. We can let you know how to support him. Um, the introduction of sorts is called I Am Salah, so I'll read this first. I am Salah, a son of Rafah, specifically from the Al Junya neighborhood. That city was not just a geographical location, it was a third lung with which I breathed. Before the world turned upside down, my home was there among my family and uncles, a warm fortress filled with the aroma of morning coffee and the sounds of laughter that we thought would last forever. We cherished the simple details of our lives, the sun of Gaza caressing the sea, the streets of Rafah that remember our footsteps, and that naive reassurance that tomorrow will be like today. My life revolved around my studies at the University of Palestine, carrying my bag and my dreams of software engineering, hoping that with a digital memory I could break the siege of my city. I travelled daily between Rafah and the central region, and between lectures we had unbreakable rituals, cheering on the Rafah Youth and Services teams, devouring fava beans and falafel from Abu Zaid restaurant, before the name became more a memory of a massacre, and evenings spent at Muad'Dib's shawarma. In the summer, the sea was our refuge, and during holidays, Gaza City, the Ramal neighborhood, and Mehran restaurant were our destinations to experience the vibrancy of life. We were building our lives in the 11th hour, stealing joy from the jaws of the siege. We didn't know we were living in paradise before we were forcibly expelled from it. And I'll read a slightly longer section that Salah wanted to be named. This was describing the events in June 29th. The treachery of the safe zone. El Mawasi was never safe, as the occupation claimed, but rather it was the scene of more than 500 attacks. On June 29th, just when it was thought the sand would protect the displaced, the armoured vehicles suddenly advanced from the direction of Rafah. Heavy shells began tearing through the canvas and nylon in the area where my uncle's tents were located. The displaced people started fleeing the tents with nothing. There was no time to take anything. The artillery shelling and quadcopter drones were relentless. The situation was dire and catastrophic. The screams of children, the weeping of women, and the bodies of martyrs lying on the ground were terrifying and indescribable. People fled homeless northward, um, escaping the Zionist killing machine. Nights passed, and the people in the street, including my uncles who had fled, witnessed the solidarity and cooperation of the people in securing the women and children in the street. The young men and older men left the tents and stayed in the street, bringing in the fleeing women and children. It was a wonderful display of love, respect, and empathy. But after all this, the greatest shock came for everyone who had lost a loved one, as we had. The tragic news was that we tried to contact my father's uncle. No answer. Anxiety began to gnaw at our hearts. Early in the morning, my father's phone rang. A strange voice on the other end spoke in broken words. Saeed's been injured, seriously. Saeed, my young uncle, my handsome, unmarried 30-year-old friend. It was a huge shock to all of us. We left Deir al-Bala that morning, despite the shelling and the dire situation. We couldn't imagine any of this happening. My father was devastated and couldn't believe it. When we arrived, my uncle told us, weeping bitterly, that Saeed had been fleeing during the night and was staying with his cousins when a shell, one of many indiscriminately fired, landed on him and a group of other displaced people. Shrapnel tore through his body and he was seriously injured in the neck and abdomen. All of this happened during the night, but in the morning we were informed of his martyrdom. Everyone there collapsed. It was a huge shock. My fathers, my uncles, my grandfather, and I all wept because he lived with us. He was a part of us. May God have mercy on him and grant him paradise. We rushed to the hospital from the morgue, and that's where the real shock came. When I saw him, his face was radiant as if he was asleep. My father kept saying to him, "Saeed, wake up, don't leave us." The morgue was overflowing with dozens of bodies. My father, the mountain I had leaned on during the war, had crumbled. I'd never seen him so weak. We kissed Uncle Saeed goodbye for the last time. He was so cold, a coldness that belied his warm heart. We buried him in a new cemetery because the others were full. And we returned to my grandfather's tent in Khan Yunis. Grief hung heavy in the air, and the weeping was incessant because it was such a great shock to us. Laughter had died in our home, and the light in my father's eyes had been extinguished forever.
Yes, I
You're
think we
on
need to.
mute.
Thank you very much. So we read this because we believe these stories need to be known, and we'll provide some more information to read the whole entire thing. And thank you for listening. I'll pass it back to you, Sam.
Thanks, Yes. Thanks so much for sharing a passage. Yeah, it sounds really vivid. You can really imagine what they're going through. And I think the name of the book is Between Life and Death in Gaza. Please, can you please send our love and support to them at this time? Okay, we're going to move on now to our next speaker. So I'd like to welcome Leigh Evans. Leigh is a retired trauma and mental health nurse and paramedic from Swansea, who has gained international attention as a Palestinian peace activist and a humanitarian aid worker. He has a long history of providing medical aid in Gaza, where he worked as an emergency medic. In June 2025, a video of Leigh went viral showing him in tears, dropping to his knees and pleading with the Egyptian riot police at the Rafah border to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. In late 2025, he joined the Freedom Flotilla Coalition with 1,000 Madeleines convoy. The mission aimed to break the blockade to deliver supplies to sailboats to Gaza. He was detained along with 145 other international volunteers in an Israeli prison following the interception of the flotilla on international waters. And in July last year, Leigh testified as a witness during the first sitting of the House of the People, which created the Charter. So it's fantastic to have you here. Obviously, you spoke on Gaza for that particular topic, so as a testimony. So it's great to have you here, and I'm going to pass over to you, Leigh. Take it away.
Lovely. Hi. Thank you all for being here. I've been going back and forth to Palestine since the early 2000s. And when I used to come back and tell people that I was seeing apartheid, that I was seeing infanticide and all the other horrors which we're seeing in such vivid pictures now, people used to disbelieve me. Some people even phoned my GP and said to my GP that, Leigh's gone off traveling somewhere, he's come back and he's lost his mind. And it's only now that when I used to speak out then, there was maybe one other voice. In fact, when I was at one of my lowest ebbs, I first heard Low Key rapping about Palestine. And I thought, thank goodness, somebody else has seen it, somebody else other than the people that I've met there. So, as I said, I've been going since the early 2000s, and I've seen it escalating. And it's almost like we're forcing their hand, really, and making them panic. So this movement is now huge. I was recently told by Iranian TV that we're nearly 1/6 of humanity now, which is standing up for Palestine, which is a beautiful thing. So I've been going back and forth, and at about in the late 2010s or the early 2010s, I had to stop going. for my own health, both physical and psychological health shouldn't be separated. But I was suffering from. Oh, that's a lovely message. Thank you. I was suffering from going back and forth there, both mentally and physically suffering. So I had to put the brakes on, and then I walked into a protest by accident, and I hadn't seen a Palestinian flag for about 7 or 8 years. And I walked on the corner in my local street, and there was a massive Palestinian flag there, and all the sounds, the smells, the sights, everything came back to me, the good and the bad. And I started to cry, and I walked on the corner and I leant up against Poundland, and the staff of Poundland came out, and they were very caring, and they looked after me. And then I took donuts to the protest and started protesting again then. And I said to myself, when I've done 1,000 more protests for Palestine, I'll do 1,000 more. And I'm on 117 at the moment, so I've still got quite a few to go for my first 1,000. So I then saw one of my neighbors is Ellie Cameo, and when I heard what Ellie done, I was inspired to go back to Palestine at the start of 2025, and that's when I first saw the F-35. I'd seen the F-19 bombing Gaza. I'd seen the F-19 bombing in Iraq. But the F-35 is another level altogether. That is another level of supersonic terrorism. And they were flying over Gaza and bombing, and then turning round and flying low over the cities of the West Bank, just to say, we can hit you at any point. We can terrorize you any way that we want. And that was, a real, I thought I'd seen it all at that point. But when I was in a place when Britain didn't vote for the ceasefire at the start of 2025, I was 10 kilometers outside Gaza and couldn't get any closer. It was too militarized. And I was working with an autonomous team there. And I was in a situation that was so frightening. I broke my own teeth, clenching my jaw to not run, because that would have been the worst thing I could have done for myself and for my team and for my patients. So the horrors that I saw, and the increase in the apartheid, the increase in the indoctrinated racism, and in the genocide, reaffirmed what I was doing. It gave me a concrete, a laser focus to what I was doing. So I came back. I was locked up 3 times when I was there for being a nurse, and it was only my white skin and my funny pink skin and my passport that got me out of there. And then when I came back, I was that much more outspoken. And I said to my poor long-suffering wife, I've got to raise more awareness to the issue of Palestine and the issue of Gaza. So I'm going to run to Gaza from South Wales. And I said, don't worry, love, it's only 91.5 marathons back to back. I'll be fine. And my wife, she's never threatened me. Of all the things I've gone through, all the things that she's been put through with me being locked up in genocide zones and things, she turned to me and she said, if you do that, Leigh, I'm going to leave you. And I was taken aback by this, and I thought, I really don't want to lose the love of my life. So the next day I opened an email, and it was the March to Gaza. So I went to my poor long-suffering wife, and I said, look, I'm not going to run to Gaza, love. She said, good, I'm not going to leave you. I said, I'm going to walk. And the expletives were so profound. I don't think you're old enough to hear what she said. But we're still together. We're still very much in love. So that's when I did the March to Gaza, and I did the non-violent, emotive stance, because I could see that we were being kettled by the military and the riot police, and it was the only thing I could do was open my heart to the children of Islam and hope that the compassion of Islam came across and allowed us through. So since then, I came back, and I see it all as being one fight. And I'd done some stuff for Defend Our Juries before I went. I'd sat outside courts with a little sign saying juries have the right to acquit via their own consciousness, before I'd gone back to Palestine. But it really came across as an example, as it showed how they're trying to break down our system so that we can't challenge them. If they can get rid of our juries and they can get their judges in place, we're really, really on a back leg then. So I saw that as being one fight. So I stood up for DOJ, and I did the arrests there as well. And one of them went really well, the one where I had retired nurse on. So after, I think it was my fourth DOJ arrest, I think it was my fourth, then I did the flotilla, and ended up in Kitsiot. And I've been to a few of their what they call prisons. I tend to call them torture camps and concentration camps. And I'd heard and I'd treated people that had been a victim of their torture, but that was the first time I'd seen the torture displayed to us as a form of terrorism, when we were in holding cages. Well, it was just after my sexual humiliation, when they let me out, of where that had happened. They stopped us dead there. There was some of us in a holding cage, some of us in a queue, waiting to go in and see somebody they said was a doctor. And they paraded a Palestinian man that they'd kept in a steel box in the desert in front of us, and they set dogs on him as a form of torture. And I think it had the opposite effect on us that they wanted it to have. You know, that again was another thing that concreted my determination to do everything that I could. So when I came back from Kitsiot, even when I landed in Heathrow, the first time that I had a chance, I told the truth, and I told the truth, and I aimed it at power, and aimed it at everybody, really, because we're uniting as humans now because of the horror we're seeing. The effect of modern weaponry on the human body is so unnatural. There is no coping mechanism for it, and it breaks us, and it should break us. So when I came back, that unity was something that I'm trying to encourage. This is why I'm going to as many places as possible, is to try and bring that unity, because they're spending a lot of money to try and disseminate this movement now, with their challenges in the courts to try and bring us apart, to accuse us of anti-Semitism, to take away the juries, to put the Filton guys down, to put the Bryce Norton guys down, to put the Keystone 3 down, to put the Muga 4, is it the Muga 4 they're called? I can't remember. Anyway, I've got a flyer for them. So why in general is because of the levels of cruelty I've seen. And that's what stood out to me is the cruelty. Not just, the death, the suffering, everything, but the ability to jade humans to a point where they can be that cruel to anybody, let alone women, children. The cruelty I've seen done to learning difficulties. It's the cruelty that really gelled everything together for me. Originally, just like the Nazis, whoever said that, it truly is. When they did, I was there in 2025 when they did the cleansing of the camps, where they put all the learning difficulties and all the blind out into the desert, and we had to go and get them. But the resilience and the unity of the Palestinian people really shines through then, when they go and get their own people and bring them in, whether there's room for them or not. I can give you very specific whys as well. There was a young girl I worked with in 2008. And she's stayed with me all the way through, but I don't think I need to give you that example. Anyway, I need to stop talking now, don't I?
Yes, that would be really helpful. Thank you so much, Leigh. That's really, really powerful stuff, powerful story. you're an incredible, determined person. We can tell from your lived experience. And thank you for being here and sharing that. We'll hear more from you in a little bit in the panel discussion, if that's okay. But we're pushed for time, so we're going to keep going, if that's okay, and hear from our next speaker now. So next up, we've got Huda Ammori. Huda is a prominent British Palestinian liberation campaigner known for her co-founding Palestine Action, who has been at the centre of a landmark legal battle over UK government attempts to criminalise direct action protests. In July 2025, the Home Office designated Palestine Action as a proscribed terrorist organisation. Huda challenged that decision in the courts, and in February this year, the High Court ruled the ban unlawful and a disproportionate interference with freedom of speech and assembly. And yet the ban has not been lifted. So Huda is here tonight speaking for herself as someone who has experienced firsthand the cost of UK government's crackdown on the right to protest. Over to you, Huda.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Leigh, and those who went before me, and thank you everyone for being here. So, just to give a bit of background on myself, I'm a daughter of a Palestinian father and a daughter of an Iraqi mother, and my father's family, their oppression at the hands of both British colonizers and the Zionist colonizers dates back nearly 100 years. My great-grandfather was assassinated by the British during the 1936 Palestine uprising against the British colonization of Palestine at the time. And then several decades later, in 1967, my father, when he was a young child, was forced to flee from his home when the Israeli military were shooting bullets into the front of their house, and they had to crawl out of the back of their own house with just the clothes they had on at the time, some of them without shoes, and basically run for their lives. And they were ethnically cleansed from their homeland. My father became a Palestinian refugee eventually in Iraq, and Iraq is where my mother's family are from, who have had to live through and endure the US and UK invasion of Iraq, and basically watch the destruction of their country before them because of Western imperialism. So I think I was probably born into this cause, and I was raised in England knowing that I was very privileged to not be growing underneath bombs, to not have to fear about my home being destroyed at any moment, but at the same time knowing that was happening to my family every single day. So as I grew up, I got involved in, protests and campaigns and boycott campaigns and campaigning against my university to divest from companies which were complicit. I did everything. I did everything possible. And I truly grew up believing, well, I'm a British citizen, and surely there are so many other people who think the same. And there are a lot of other people that think the same, but that we should be able to create change. And, you only get so far when you start to realize that no matter if you have the facts and the reason and the logic and truth on your side, that when you're trying to appeal to the oppressors, to politicians, to the government, to create the necessary change and not be involved in the oppression of Palestinians, you keep hitting a brick wall. And you start to realize that actually they know the facts on the ground. They know what they're doing are crimes against humanity. They know the occupation is illegal, and that Palestinians deserve their own liberation. But they choose to be involved in it because it suits them to be allied with the Zionist regime. So about in 2020, before that, I was working for PSC and I left, and I realized that the only option I felt left was to take direct action. And that's when we started, a few of us started Palestine Action. And our aim was simple. It was to shut Elbit down. And how we were going to do this was go to their sites, go to their offices, occupy their factories, damage their factories, dismantle their sites, and force them to close down. And that's what we did. And from action to action, we just saw more people joining Palestine Action, to the point where it was hundreds, if not thousands, taking direct action against Elbit systems over the years. And Palestine Action successfully permanently shut down now 4 Israeli weapons sites. So some of those are factories and some of those are their headquarters. But I always said, and believe it to be true, that every moment you shut down one of these weapons factories is a victory. Every day you shut them down is a victory, because you are disrupting the supply chain. You create a knock-on effect in the supply chain of these weapons, and stopping one weapon has the potential to save a life, and that means all of it's worth it in the end. And we were very effective, and the government didn't like that. Elbit systems didn't like that. The Israeli embassy, pro-Israel lobby groups. I can go on, the list is endless of the meetings that were happening between these different bodies to try and crack down on Palestine Action. And that led to the prescription of Palestine Action in July 2025. I can't believe it's nearly been a year of it, but hopefully we're getting to the point where we will get this ban lifted. And I think something in all of this repression, the use of terrorism legislation, is you can really see that they have been forced to expose how fascist they are, how much they are willing to crack down on their own citizens in service of a foreign genocidal regime, the lengths they are going to crack down on people, what they're doing to the Filton 24, to many other actionists. And just last week, 4 of the Filton 24 were convicted of criminal damage. They were first facing charges of aggravated burglary and violent disorder, and they won that. And the judge basically, as we're seeing now in more protest cases, stitched up the trial, stopped them from being able to talk about the context, stopped them from being able to talk about Gaza, didn't allow them to tell the jury that if they were convicted of criminal damage, that judge would try and sentence them as terrorists. And this is the new trick that they're trying to use, which led to the 4 of them being convicted, and they will be sentenced on June 12th. So I do just want to urge everyone to get down to Woolwich Crown Court, to post about what's happening, to share what's happening, and to tell people, because they are trying to use the Filton case as the test case to try and charge people with criminal damage in the courts, but then sentence them as terrorists. And just to explain, they are trying to say that it meets the definition of terrorism because it's serious property damage. They destroyed Israeli quadcopter drones. They destroyed those drones that you see being used in Gaza to massacre people constantly. That's what they're calling the serious property damage. And it has to be done to influence a government. So the judge is saying, well, they tried to influence the Israeli government by restricting them of weapons during a genocide. So when I mean how they're exposing themselves, they're willing to use unprecedented powers to sentence protesters as terrorists for the very first time in order to protect a foreign genocidal regime. And really, the more they try and crack down on us, the more that they are exposing themselves and revealing to the British public how deep this truly goes, and how in order to free ourselves, we must free Palestine. We must shut Elbit down. And this fight against the terror connection, against the prescription, I do believe we're going to defeat the use of terrorism legislation. And then Elbit systems and the British government will not have a single trick left to use against us, and then Elbit will be shut down. So I'm looking forward to that happening, hopefully very soon, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Huda. Thank you. That was amazing to hear your life story, and the work that you're doing is incredible. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I know you're super unbelievably busy with everything that you're doing, and I can see all the love coming in. Please absorb that, because we are all appreciating you, and everyone who's doing that work. So gonna move on now to our next speaker, and I'm going to welcome Angie Zelter. Angie Zelter is a globally recognised British peace, environmental and human rights award-winning campaigner who has dedicated over 40 years to non-violent direct action. She co-founded the International Women's Peace Service and spent years on the ground in the West Bank to protect Palestinian civilians from military and settler violence. This work eventually led her to being banned from re-entering the country. She is widely regarded as one of the UK's most prolific activists, with a record of over 100 arrests and 16 prison sentences for her commitment to global justice. She was the Trident Three, one of the Trident Three, who were famously acquitted in 1999 after damaging a nuclear-related sonar testing station. In 2012, she was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. She has also received the Right Livelihood Award, which is often called the Alternative Nobel Prize. Without further ado, I'll pass over to Angie.
Hi, thanks for inviting me here. In the 1980s, as I've been told to give my story, I'm sorry if I'm repeating a bit of what's already been said, but in the 1980s, horrified by our proximity to a devastating nuclear war, I started campaigning for nuclear disarmament. This included protests against nuclear power stations because of their close association with the military nuclear system. I helped with many others to strengthen the non-violent movement and promote understanding of international humanitarian laws. We protested at the nuclear weapons bases at Aldermaston, Burfield, Faslane and Coalport, and also in Europe, for instance, at NATO headquarters in Brussels. Thousands of us were arrested, fined and sent to prison. In the 1980s, the Snowball campaign involved us cutting the fences around the US bases in the UK. We were charged with criminal damage and sparked a very public debate about whether it was non-violent to cut fences. This debate continued after two major disarmament actions in the 1990s, the first being the Seeds of Hope Ploughshares action in 1996 that disabled a BAE Hawk jet, thus preventing its export to Indonesia to be used in the genocide in East Timor. Later, three of us disarmed an essential link in the nuclear Trident submarine system in Loch Goil. And we were acquitted both times, receiving major press coverage. Many people now feel like I do, that property damage done to prevent harm to life is non-violent. In our trials, we were allowed to explain how it is lawful, in the same way as a fireman might break down a door in order to rescue someone from a fire. In those days, unlike now, we were allowed to talk about our motivations and use legal arguments that persuaded jurists to acquit us. However, with few people continuing the actions, we had to empower sustained resistance in order to create change. Thus, the Faslane 365 year of blockades from 2005 to 6 invited, encouraged, and gave support to different groups to blockade Faslane for one day each. This sustained year-long blockade helped move the Scottish government and public towards nuclear disarmament. They still have to achieve it, but they're much further along this route than anywhere else in the UK. In August 2001, I joined a Women in Black group at the start of the international solidarity movement in Palestine, helping with non-violence trainings. And there I met Netta Golan, with whom I co-founded the International Peace Service Palestine in 2002. I'd visited Israel before, as my father-in-law was Jewish and had relatives living there, but it was only when I lived and worked for months at a time over 3 years in the West Bank, recording the human rights abuses, that I realized the extent of Palestinian dispossession and suffering. Although I was deported from Israel in 2005, I've been involved in Palestinian solidarity ever since. Once the Gaza genocide started, I felt I had to do more. My father was Armenian, and his family had suffered during the 1915-23 Armenian genocide in Turkey. Unfortunately, humans have experienced thousands of years of unjust wars and genocides, and I wanted to be part of a movement to change this. I was involved with Defend Our Juries, sitting outside that first court in support of Trudy Warner, and then in the many DOJ actions supporting Palestine Action. The campaign for the deproscription of Palestine Action was close to my heart, as I openly supported Palestine Action's non-violent and incredibly effective disarmament of Israeli arms factories here in the UK. Having been arrested 10 times for holding the placard, and supporting Palestine Action, I've seen the strength of this simple but powerful action that has involved well over 3,000 people from many different backgrounds. It's a tremendous example of resistance and has to continue. It's worth remembering that the designation of non-violent direct actionists as terrorists has been building up for over 20 years. It was in 2004 that a small group of us printed some T-shirts saying, "We are all terror suspects. Democracy dies without protest." That was 20 years ago, when some of the anti-nuclear peace organizations I was involved in were listed in a counter-terrorism police document by Prevent. After these many decades of protests, arrests, imprisonments, and fines, we find that the genocides in Gaza, Sudan, Burma, and other places continue. US nuclear weapons and military bases are still threatening the world, and nuclear plants are still touted as necessary to secure our energy. Climate change continues, more species are being lost every day, climate deniers are still around, and new oil and gas reserves are being exploited, and our democratic rights to free speech and protest are being stripped away from us. But this is not a time to get depressed or disheartened. I've recently returned from a week-long peace camp at RAF Lakenheath, where Israeli pilots have been trained and fighter jets have been flown to the Middle East to support Israeli and US aggression in that region, including their ongoing illegal war against Iran. The UK is thus complicit in these horrors. The Lakenheath Alliance for Peace has been going only for 3 years, trying to prevent the US from bringing back its nuclear bombs. We failed in that, but we continue to resist. Since the downing of one of the Lakenheath fighter jets in Iran, our work tracking all the planes going out to the Middle East, and then the effective 6-hour blockade at the main gate on the day after the camp, we have finally had some mainstream media coverage. The 40-minute film of the camp and blockade will hopefully encourage more people to join our actions. I just want to finish by saying that we have to celebrate the fact that our many anti-militarist campaigns and protests continue. We're still here. We haven't gone away. We are showing that it is not being done in our names. We don't know what will finally work, but meanwhile, we are keeping the flame of resistance alive. We are showing resilience despite the difficulties with the massive changes in protest law. And more importantly, more people are understanding the links between militarism, climate change, biodiversity loss, and the authoritarian attacks on our civil rights, democracy, and our judicial system. Thank you.
Amazing, Angie. Thank you so much for telling us your story. It was super inspirational, and great to hear about the work happening at Lakenheath at the moment. That's really exciting stuff. So yeah, now we're going to move on to our next speaker. Okay, now we've got Shel McDonagh. In a previous life, Shel taught maths, mostly in inner London schools, because she wanted to make a difference and give her students a learning environment based on community, respect and empowerment for those that are failed in society. That changed in 2019 when she joined Extinction Rebellion with her realization and sense of moral obligation that to make a difference, she had to take part in mass civil disobedience and non-violent direct action. Since leaving teaching in 2020, she now is organising and non-violent strategist with various environmental and peace movements. Shel has recently been organising with Fairford Action Against War and Genocide, and has previously been involved in organisations like HS2 Rebellion, Insulate Britain, Ensure Our Survival, Defend Our Juries, and the recent Lift the Ban campaign, and has mentored movements and campaigns globally. Let's pass it over to Shel.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here. I must admit, it does feel quite a bit overwhelming to follow on from people who I'd call friends, but also these are the people that also inspire me to keep doing what I'm doing. And I think that's an important part about my story. I am what I would say is a normal person. I am actually a person who nowadays could be a reform voter, given my upbringing and my background. And instead, I am someone that votes Green. And I am someone also that has had some privileges in my life that I have not taken for granted, and feel at every opportunity it's my obligation to give back, or what we say, give back, but actually to live in a community where we share, we learn from each other, and we share our skills. So I'm actually a daughter of a secular Jewish mother. So the Holocaust was quite prevalent, and genocide was quite prevalent in speaking about my mum's side of the family. And my father's an Irish immigrant. And so there was a lot there. But actually, my parents didn't speak to me much about those things until I was a lot older. So I lived quite a normal life. I went through a hippie phase in my teens and was just dismissed for it, when actually deep down, that was me screaming out, trying to find my tribe, trying to find people that wanted to take action, because I couldn't understand why we had wars going on around the world, why it was that I had a roof over my head, why it was that I could go to school when someone else couldn't in another country, because countries like ours were waging war. For what purpose? No one could ever answer those questions. So I suppose I did spend a lot of my life or earlier life in ignorance. I loved learning, so that's what I did. And I aspired to be a maths teacher, because when I said I wanted to work in volunteering and charity work, I was told, well, to do that, you need to find a rich husband. And from a working class background, it's not something you aspire to. So I did end up going into teaching, actually via the route of studying sociology. And I studied a lot about social movement theory at the time that Occupy Wall Street was going down, and I was on exchange here in the US as well. So I lapped up everything I could about revolution, and realizing that actually to make change in society, there is something bigger that we have to do, and we have an obligation to do that. Though I continued on through going into teaching, because again, my life was very much confined to I must conform to this system. But I actually suffered with great depression over this, and was put on medicine for depression when actually I knew it was the situation. And my life changed completely when I stumbled across Extinction Rebellion. Suddenly I'm surrounded by people that understood me. Suddenly I'm surrounded by opportunities where I can speak about things. I can question why we're not talking more about the links between different things, and also feel that I had a voice, because I knew that marches didn't work. I knew that petitions didn't work. I knew that contacting my MP didn't work. So I had to do more. It was my obligation. So my life in activism took me through the environmental route, but at the core of it, I was brought up under the psalm of love thy neighbour as you love thyself. So for me, it's about peace in the communities that I'm around, and it's about peace globally. But it's not even just about peace, it's about the justice aspect as well. And that's a big thing for me. And what we were seeing in protests and mass civil disobedience and direct action in the UK was the repressive laws coming into place at a faster rate than we ever would have imagined. I was studying social movement theory 15 years ago, and we laughed that, well, society's going into some form of collapse soon. But by God, I did not assume that the UK would be suddenly branding us terrorists. And I supported a lot of friends who took action with Palestine action in the early days. And actually myself, I suffer from a lot of anxiety. So I have a lot of respect for people that have the courage to step up and do that form of direct action. Whereas for me, I'm more than happy to sit in a road, be arrested, and be charged 3 times now under the Terrorism Act for holding signs. And there was something beautiful last year about seeing so many people come out, even though all we're told is there are these oppressive laws. You'll get charged with terrorism. You can't do this. You can't do that. Well, I can't go back and see my family and friends in the US where I lived for a while. And they don't come over here much. I can't get a job in teaching because I have 3 terrorism charges. But so what? It is our voice that we need to stand up for, stand up and use. Because at the end of the day, this is nothing when you see what is happening in Palestine. The fact that there are people that have to live through this daily, the fact that the Israeli government controls access to water in the West Bank, the fact that schools are being bombed, my peers, my teaching peers are being murdered and massacred. And literally now world leaders are able to stand up and speak about the annihilation of an entire country. It's absolutely absurd. So I've continued down the route of taking more direct action at the moment at US military bases, and was present with Angie at Laken Heath and was arrested for blockading the base there. And I'm now part of Fairford Action. I actually live in Gloucestershire, and as soon as this phase of the illegal war started on Iran, I was very aware of the links that are also being made. The story of the Palestinians is being erased because we're focused on Iran, when actually these are the same struggles. While these bombs are being laid on Iran, we've also still got the annihilation of the people in Gaza. We've got what's happening in Lebanon. It's just, and what's happening in Syria. It's just absolutely absurd. So making these links between the environment, between the genocide, between the US militarism, which is something down the road that I can get involved in, was a necessity. And also creating these alliances where we can give the platform and the voices of the Palestinian people, of those who are oppressed, at the forefront of this. I feel it's my obligation to educate myself more about those struggles, listen to their stories, celebrate their cultures. And I very much encourage others. Many of us on the call are engaged with those things, but actually it shouldn't be my voice that we're listening to. It should be the voices of the Palestinian peoples. So I do invite people to think about, when they are coming to calls and things, please, of course, come to things that you hear about. But when you see a call that is people from Palestine that are speaking about their experiences, about their cultures, please join those. It's those voices that we need to be listening to. Because at the end of the day, we can go into a very Western mindset of being the heroes. We're not the heroes. We're not the victims. Getting a terrorism charge is absolutely nothing. And also, whilst the Palestinian people are victims, they are resilient. They are living through this daily. And we need to elevate their voices because they are constantly being dehumanized. And we need to rehumanize these people. They are people just like us. I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shel. And I can see a lot of love coming in for you. I think a lot of people resonated with what you said. And thank you also for telling us about Fairford Action. I want to hear more. It sounds brilliant. Okay, we're going to move on now to our final speaker of the evening. Oh, sorry, that's my little alarm. Got time management going on. Sorry. Okay, our final speaker of the evening. And it's Dizraeli, who's a talented British rapper, singer, poet, multi-instrumental artist from Bristol. And they're a prominent cultural disruptor or artivist who frequently uses their platform to support social and political causes, exploring themes of social injustice, humanitarian crises, and global conflict. Dizraeli is a signatory of the Artists' Pledge for Palestine, committing to cultural boycott of Israeli state sponsorship institutions until international law is respected. He often uses his platform to speak about humanitarian crisis in Gaza and on the West Bank. In the new track, Normal, he directly confronts governmental policies and the normalization of conflict in Palestine. The track acts as an urgent wake-up call. You might have heard it when you first arrived on the call. That was what we were playing at the beginning. Other tracks include Take Me to the River, exploring themes of belonging, displacement, and returning to one's roots, concepts central to his advocacy for Palestinian rights. Without further ado, I'll pass over to Diz.
Thank you so much. I am absolutely overwhelmed by everything I've heard this evening and the people that I've met and the life stories I've heard. I'm very, very humbled to be here. I was sort of astonished to be asked alongside the other people that have spoken. So I'm feeling very inspired and very enraged and very humanized, as you were just saying, Shel. I'll talk a little bit more about rehumanizing in a moment. So just a very quick skip through my story. I used to be called Dizraeli for a very long time. I just saw it when I was a 15-year-old young MC and thought it was a cool word. Turned out he was a imperialist, misogynistic piece of work from the 19th century, who also happened to be a British Prime Minister. I always kind of wanted to change it, but the ongoing genocide at the moment inspired me to finally change my name after 27 years of being Dizraeli. So I'm now Diz Undone. What is my journey with Palestine? Well, the Palestinian cause spoke to me at university. I was involved with the Palestine Solidarity Campaign at Sussex Uni. Went on 2 trips to the West Bank in the early 2010s. And the first one, I mean, I think probably everybody's first contact with Palestine, with the Palestinian people, with the oppression, with the apartheid wall, probably everybody's first contact with all of that is absolutely mind-blowing and heart-expanding and heartbreaking. And so was mine. I had the good fortune of going back to Palestine again in 2015 for a festival called Bethlehem Live, which is a brilliant festival in the streets of Bethlehem. Really advise anyone here to go and check it out if you ever can. But then, honestly, I hadn't engaged a huge amount with the Palestinian cause since about 2015, 2016. Short of writing a few songs, I had been highly involved in the climate movement, Extinction Rebellion. I was at all of the rebellions and any action I could be at related to the environment, coming from an activist family. My dad was a green activist. And it was the start of this new chapter of the Israeli genocide that reactivated my connection with Palestine. I'd just become a father of twins. I was deep in the family tunnel. My focus was turned inwards on my family. And this kind of just slapped me round the moral chops and turned me outwards again. And I had to feel I was doing something. I had young kids. I was trying to feed a family for the first time in my life. So I turned to the thing that I could do, that I was doing in my day-to-day, and I started writing a lot of poetry and songs and offering these wherever I could on the topic of Palestine and the genocide, from marches to fundraisers, whatever. And, you know, even saying that now, I feel almost embarrassed saying that that's what I felt I had to offer. But I do believe artists matter to the picture. We are culture makers, and culture is the norms of thought that move people to action or move people to support a genocide or to vote against those who support a genocide. So I believe when humans are close to each other, when we can see each other, the color of each other's eyes without the filter of dehumanizing, we're basically good to each other. And you can see the work that is done by the British mainstream media, you know, the use of language around Palestinian versus Israeli deaths across media, from government figures. Obviously, the Israeli state and media's project to dehumanize the Palestinian people. Part of the purpose, I think, of the apartheid wall in Palestine is to separate the populations so relationships aren't formed, so sympathy doesn't come from the Israelis towards the Palestinians. So I think I've come to the conclusion that my work as an artist is about rehumanizing exactly what you were saying, Shel. I'm going to share a poem, if that's okay, which was my first effort to find the kind of visceral bodily humanity in the stories I was so horrified at on social media. When she looks at me, all she sees is craters that ate 1,000 houses and all the children of her nearest neighbors, the ones she grew up with and shared a bath with, the ones she giggled with in English classes. She sees Fatima with her unicorns and thick glasses, Fatima with her kindness and her silly dances. She sees Fatima lying grey with her body in a twisted mess, her face replaced with something hideous. Fatima, she says, I hold my cup, wish I could hold her too, but she cannot be touched, because every fingertip's a missile to her now. In even the daylight's a blade that leaves a jagged cut. They told her to evacuate, but where to go? When they're bombing hospitals and bombing roads. She is just 14. She should be scared of ghosts, not tangled in a terror, seeing shrapnel in her parents' throats and bloody matted hair and bones spattered on the kitchen cabinets while sirens scream over their aerodrome. Her hands tremble, her teeth chatter, and her face is creased. So tired, but there's nowhere left that's safe to sleep. And in her eyes, I see there never will be, and it kills me. Shame on my government and shame on me. So, as I said, I think my work now is one of rehumanizing, and this is work for me, for my own sake, as much as for others. I felt the gradual normalization of seeing Palestinian bodies and Palestinian lives being brutalized, and I felt that it wasn't moving me in the way that it had moved me. And I was terrified of feeling that sort of graying out, that dumbing, that sort of dulling in myself. And that's the point, isn't it? This is how this works. They flood the zone, not just with bullshit, but also with horrors now. The idea is that we're all dulled to inaction. So perhaps in rehumanizing, we could rehumanize to action. I don't know how long I've got. I'm probably
That's
close.
it. Yeah.
That's it. Okay, brilliant. So can I just to wrap up?
Yeah.
I think the piece by Salah at the beginning of the call was a reminder to me of how much more powerful it is to hear from people living this reality. So perhaps the single most important work we can do in rehumanizing is giving a meaningful meaningful platform to Palestinian people. Tony Cade Bambara said, as a cultural worker who belongs to an oppressed people, my job is to make the revolution irresistible. I don't belong to an oppressed people, but I know that we are all part of each other. And I think as a culture worker in these times, full stop, our job is to make the revolution irresistible. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Your words were so inspiring and powerful. I don't know how to articulate it. I'm not a wordsmith. You are. You articulate very well what I'm thinking. So thank you for sharing. And you are totally valid. Every speaker who's spoken tonight is exactly meant to be here. And thank you so much for all of you for bringing like various different things. And yeah, next we are going to have a little chat now. We're going to have a little panel discussion. And I'm going to pass over to Jens.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Yeah, so we're going to have a bit of a chat, a discussion with our guests on a couple of questions that we're interested in your wisdom on. So there's three questions, and I guess whoever would like to answer, please pop your hand up, and I'll pass it on to you. But the first one, this demand to end genocide support. The question is like how, like what sort of things do you guys support in your personal experience or awareness, which are being done that are effective or have the potential to be effective to try and stop this genocide, and potentially which ones are less effective as well, if you want to share some of those perspectives. So I don't know if any of you want to come in with your thoughts, but put your hand up and we'll pass it on to you. Yeah, Angie, we'd love to hear from you, please.
I think it's really, really important for us to talk to our neighbours and friends and people in our localities. The thing is, there's a lot of disinformation going out, and unless we actually talk to people about what we've seen and what's really going on, those narratives will continue to be there. So actually, I know there's loads of vigils going on locally, and they can, they're really useful in themselves, but we're not having enough conversations with people, and we're still in our own little bubbles. We also work at the moment in our local area in Wales, with a group that brings Palestinians over, and we get them into schools and into the WI meetings and into all sorts of things like that. And that's a great way of getting more conversations going. And also there's a project now trying to raise money and get it into Gaza. I still haven't worked out how the hell they get it into Gaza, because everything's done through the Israelis, but they then can buy the seeds and equipment that they do. And there actually is an agricultural project. So some of the people in the Welsh food and farming groups are trying to do things like that. So all of those different projects are really, really important for keeping the conversation going. Obviously, we have to carry on with the vigils and the demonstrations, the DOJ actions. And the other thing that I'm coming up with at the moment and trying to get some advice on is something we did in the peace movement a long time ago, which is basically to see if we can get loads of people around the country to go to their local police station and report the crime of genocide. Won't get very far, but if you get hundreds outside each police station doing this, or even 20 in loads and loads of police stations, that's something. And the other thing is to lay information at the local courts about the genocide going on. Again, it only goes so far, but it's something else. And the main thing is for us all to have conversations and come up with ideas. Nobody knows what's going to work. This is a deeply entrenched problem. And there's an economy around war and around genocide. But by talking to each other and trying to keep our energies going and keep the light going, we'll come up with more and more things that we can do.
Wow, thank you so much. So many really practical things, and yeah, loving the sort of range of things on a local level, on a national. Would love to come to you, Shel, on your perspectives. Yeah, come in.
Thank you. Actually, Huda, do you want to input first? I prefer if Huda goes first.
Yeah, that's all good. Who did? Please do.
I'll probably say the same thing anyway. But the way I see it at the moment is there's two fronts to this. One is being on the offensive against the support for genocide, and I think it's obvious what I'm going to say. But that is direct action against the Israeli weapons manufacturers, against the weapons manufacturers supplying Israel. That has continued despite the prescription of Palestine action. And I think it's really important to be clear that even though they prescribe Palestine action, they can't prescribe direct action as a tactic. And there are groups and people offering trainings on direct action. So I'll put a link to that. It's directactiontraining.org. But I think the other side as well is the, I guess, defensive in some way about defending the repression, against the repression of those who are, being labelled, being prescribed as terrorists or labelled terrorists or sentenced as terrorists, for being on the front lines for, resisting against this genocide. And I think we need to do those two things, and that's where I see the incredible mass civil disobedience campaign, the Lift the Ban. That's been ongoing, and honestly, we would not have won the High Court challenge. That's a fact. We would not have won the High Court challenge if it wasn't for the thousands of people, making sure that they defended all of our rights and the rights to support the Palestinian people without being labelled terrorists. Yeah, and that includes supporting the people like the Fulton 24 and the other prisoners and people with upcoming court cases who face being labelled as terrorists, but also showing that direct action can continue. There are different forms of direct action, whether that's blockades, occupying buildings, and even causing damage in at some points as well. So there is a range of things that people can be involved in. But in Palestine action, often you saw the actionists, the people taking action, but there was a reason We Are All Palestine Action became popular. It's because it took so many people for those actions to be able to happen, in the sense of the people providing the support, the people coming to court cases, people picking people up, people creating the culture around it. So everyone has their part to play, but there are very viable, strong options that we can be taking to stop the support for genocide from Britain.
Thank you, Huda. Thank you very much. Shel, what about you?
Yeah, just to add to what Huda said, in fact, just to kind of boost it even more, there's many people's names I recognise on the call, and I've run non-violence trainings now for thousands of people in the UK. And to me, non-violence, and this is an incorporation of many of the non-violence teachers out there, is about actively mitigating for harm. And right now, actively mitigating for harm in the UK looks like direct action. For every drone that can be taken away and destroyed and stopped from getting over there, that is actively mitigating for harm. So it's not a question about what is violent and what is not non-violent. This is non-violence in action. And also many of us have taken action, either with Defend Our Juries, may have done direct action before in the past. It's great fun, nappy and things like that, as many people get used to. But we have privileges that we can do it. And there's people that can do more and do more sacrifices to do it. It's not easy living a life like this. It's not easy not having things and not having stability, but it feels right. And sometimes we do just need that push to understand we can sacrifice a bit more for the causes that we care so much about. And at the end of the day, just peace and justice.
Yeah, thank you, Shel. I think it's really, really important actually to make that distinction, isn't it, between not being violent and being non-violent, about sort of standing and watching or intervening, as you say, to prevent harm. Leigh, I saw your hand is up. We can welcome you to come in. Alternatively, I can sort of talk about the next question. I don't know if you have some perspectives about that. We have three questions. We're going to return to the sort of the role of the public, but I suppose insofar that there are, there are answers to this question which maybe aren't getting enough attention. Why do you guys think the UK government continues to so full-throatedly support, not just being complicity with this genocide, but actually engage in support with them, with this violation of international law? We have a supposed legal expert as the Prime Minister. Last time I checked, I haven't looked at the news, but the question is, what's going wrong here that we need to be drawing our attention to? Leigh, please come in.
Hi, yeah. For me, the key of it is we have a capitalist government. So a capitalist government is only interested in capital and governance. So the money is in the arms trade. The money is in the land theft. So the people are irrelevant. Capitalism is sociopathic by its nature. It doesn't have empathy. We have empathy. We see people suffering. We want to help them. We want to stop that suffering. Capitalism doesn't. Governance doesn't either. Because this movement is growing so big, we're starting to affect their capital and their ability to make money through the wanton destruction of humanity and the environment and people. Because we're affecting that, that's where the governance comes in. And now the capitalists who are running the central banks, who are running Israel, who are running the banks, the weapons manufacturers, they're now directly affecting our judicial system because, one, the capitalist government will bow down to the god of money, and two, they've been allowed into the judicial system. All the courts that I've been to and we're all going to are now run by Sodexo and G4S. They're literally running the courts, and those courts have to make money. But they are the same people who own shares in Elbit, own shares in Raphael Systems. So it literally is one struggle and one fight. We've got to reclaim our judicial system, our country, deviate away from the need for capitalism, and definitely away from central banks. So we need a massive upheaval. We need not just our direct action and everything that we're all involved in, which is so powerful, but we need to challenge the system. And that's why I think Assemble is beautiful, because you've got a grasp on true democracy, and your grasp of true democracy can undermine the system of separatism that we have at the moment.
Thank you, Leigh. Huda, what are your thoughts, please?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that, Britain started all of the colonization of Palestine with the Balfour Declaration in 1917 when they signed over the land of Palestine to the Zionists, which they never had the right to do, and occupy and colonize Palestine and paved the way for the Nakba in 1948. So there isn't a point in time when Britain decided to support the Zionists. It's been like that. It's because of the British that we're in this position in the first place, and no government has differed from that or broken away from that. Essentially because because that's how it's always been. Britain has always been part of the Zionist and imperial project in Palestine and in other places like Iraq and across um, West Asia. So I think it's important to remember that context, and also, when we try and think about the political process, I think you look at Shabana Mahmood, my arch nemesis. But anyway, you look at Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, and she was on marches in 2014 saying how much she supports Palestine. And in order to get to a position of power, she's had to completely do a 180 on those values, and is now enforcing the prescription of Palestine Action, is completely allied to the Zionist project. And it's, and in order to have that position of power. So, it's, I don't really have much faith in any political process, because I've seen again and again how, the closer they get to the top, the first thing that goes down, the first thing that they sell out is Palestine. And and I've seen the documents about the prescription, and it's very clear what's happened. They had meetings with the Israeli government, they had meetings with people like We Believe in Israel, pro-Israel lobby groups, campaigning against anti-Semitism. These people have a door into power. They'll never meet with us. They would never do that. These people have a door into power that we do not have. And so there's a lot of corruption in our political system, but it has been ongoing now for nearly 100 years. So, I think, and when you realize all of that, the magnitude of it, then, I think that's when you start to realize that appealing to those same people is not gonna create the necessary change.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's so important, isn't it? It's about who is whispering to our politicians, and who is demanding they do their bidding, and who isn't. Like the broader public obviously overwhelmingly would want to see something different, and yet um it doesn't seem to be manifesting, and people who try, as we've heard, are imprisoned and worse. And so, like, finally, I guess the last question is, we've talked about the kind of maybe the spiky end, if you like, of non-violence, of intervention to prevent harm, of direct action to immediately try and stop the building of arms or bombs or planes, or even, the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people who have also been willing to take on terror charges for the sake of lifting the ban and ending the prescription of Palestine Action. But I suppose the next question is about the broad public masses, the general public. Like, what role do people who aren't, for whatever reason, or who haven't been for whatever reason, been stepping up into sort of strong action, what role does the general public have to play, and how can they reach a critical mass, and what would that look like to maximize pressure on the government and institutions and corporations to stop arming and supporting these crimes? And any other, like, final thoughts you would also like to share with us about what, how we can hope and imagine and vision change in the future. Leigh, thanks for raising your hand. We'd welcome you to come in.
Yeah, for me, it's the finances. Because without the finances, they couldn't do anything. But people are working so hard. So many people in this country now have got 2 or 3 jobs. They can't bring up their own children because their children have got to go to childcare so they can earn more money. And they don't realize how much of their taxes, how much of their national insurance, how much of their what do you call it, council tax, poll tax it was when I rioted against it, how much of these taxes are actually being used to prop up the arms trade and to fund the genocide in Palestine. And for me, it's as Angie said, is keep talking to people, and that's what I keep pointing out. How many hospitals can be built? How many teachers can be trained? How many schools can be trained? How can we lower our bills if we didn't pay so much money for a genocide of an innocent people? And then looking at our state, our monarchy, and the such like, and tying it all together, because it really is one little cabal from the way that I view it. I don't know if anybody disagrees, but it's pointing out to people how their lives are becoming enslaved to fund a genocide, and to fund genocides not just in Palestine, in Sudan, in the Congo, and how we're each responsible for our actions, and how we each can make personal commitment on those two, even if it's just challenging our local council over where's my council tax going, and challenging the government. Why am I spending so much money on genocide or on an attack budget, not on a defense budget? So it's bringing awareness through people's pockets, because people are feeling the squeeze now. Doesn't matter what sort of level of society they're at. So
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for offering that. Angie, we'd love to come in as well, please.
We've just had loads and loads of election leaflets put through our door, and they're all saying loads of rubbish stuff about what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. But I was just suddenly thinking, why aren't we putting leaflets into people's doors about what's really happening, and trying to put real facts in people's in their doorstep? So I'm just wondering about whether that might be something that we could do to, again, get away from all the lies. You're absolutely right, all of you. The institution, this is a long process of colonizing. We've been colonizing for hundreds of years, basically. To change Britain at the moment, unless our structures change, nothing's going to change. And that can't change unless people change. We have to have a cultural shift. And unfortunately, people are mostly getting their information from the wrong sources. And the only way we can deal with this is to try to make sure that we put the real truth out to people. And maybe leaflets is one idea. I'm sure there's loads more ideas out there. We're going to have to really think.
Thank you. It's interesting you say that, because another of the demands of the People's Charter, which was a result basically of people hearing the history, hearing the legal framework, hearing the history of the British involvement in Palestine, in that land, and one of the main demands, on top of the one that we've already been talking about here, was about education, about trying to get this information in front of everyone, so that transformation in the consciousness of the country can be seamless and easy. So I want to thank, Shel, you've raised your hand. I want to welcome you to come in. Thanks, guys, for sticking around for slightly longer. Obviously, this is a complex topic and it does need the time to fully, discuss. So we'll be wrapping up fairly shortly, but I'll come to you, Shel, please.
Yeah, just wanted to briefly add about literally like education, because not only is it necessary to talk about our history and learn from history, which history does keep repeating itself, and it's quite worrying. In a cell at Lakenheath, I was literally reading about non-violence and conscientious objection in World War II, and the lead up to it was exactly what we are seeing right now. But it shows that the education system is broken, and even worse so, there are arms companies intertwined within schools. kids in primary school are being given colouring books of bombers at the moment. Yet a couple of years ago, the education system was changed where we couldn't speak about Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter. So as parents can challenge the schools. You know, the army comes into the school. We talk about war so much. Our history is about war and the foundations. As parents, we can start challenging that and challenging the teachers and the head teachers of the schools about why the curriculum is like that and why the school chooses to conform to those types of curriculums too.
Thank you very much, Shel. Thank you very much for offering that important voice. All right, I'm going to now pass it back to Sam, who can maybe elaborate a bit more about the People's Charter that we've been referring to before, wishing us all well for the night. Sam.
Thanks so much. So now that leads us nicely on to explain a little bit more about the demand and why we're here today. So the demand is to end support for genocide, as you know, and that this call is all about that. And it came from the Charter, the People's Charter. I'll talk a few minutes about that. So the People's Charter was born out of the first sitting of the House of the People. And the House of the People is basically a grassroots organised citizens' assembly. And a citizens' assembly is a group of people selected by democratic lottery to reflect the diversity of the population. So it's similar to basically a jury service, okay? They learn from experts, deliberate, and make informed decisions, consensus-based recommendations that basically are tricky policy issues. So they're dealing with things that politicians can't wrap their heads around. They're sort of like existential stuff. They bridge the gap between public opinion and policymakers. The current political system is a members club, mostly made up of corrupt politicians that are puppets for their highest bidder. And don't get me started on the age, race, or gender. That's why we need those most affected by the budget cuts basically at the dinner table, making those decisions. Because if all of us was at the dinner table, then we wouldn't be making such horrendous decisions. So that's why last year Assemble convened the first sitting of the House of the People, the first sitting of many to come. Members of the House heard from inputs from thousands of local people who set the agenda, the first truly grassroots citizens' assembly of its kind, and all the charter demands came up organically from the floor after hearing from experts on each of the topics. The proof is truly in the pudding. So let's look really quickly at what those 5 key demands are. You know one of them already, end support for genocide, which explicitly means stopping all arms, trade and support to any country violating international law, starting with immediate embargo on Israel. The next one is about taxing wealth, not work. So closing loopholes for ultra-rich, fixing investment income, pension perks and banking services to raise 40 billion a year and fund our future. Slash political corruption, which means ban corporate lobbying and gifting and second jobs for MPs. Politics exists to serve the interests of the people, not corporations and not their own. Choose life over GDP, which is basically establishing a Future Generations Act, a law above all laws to put people and nature above gross domestic profit. And the last but not least demand is to reclaim our homes. So that means take homes out of the hands of those who buy them but never live in them, bring empty buildings into public use, cap rents and build green, affordable council housing. You can read more about the Charter, the link's in the chat. This webinar series is themed around one of those demands, as you know. The next one coming up is called Slashing Political Corruption, and that's on Thursday, June the 11th. And we've got the journalist George Monbiot will be there and various other speakers. So it'll be hopefully another active, fun night. We're almost finished now, guys. So just hang on a minute. Thank you so much for all of the people that came, all the speakers. And I'm now going to pass to Yaz, who's going to talk through the pathways to action. What do we do next? Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Sam. Great. All right. Thank you, everyone, again for coming. Like all these really important people, we've listened to them. We've thought about the importance of this demand. We all want to build a better system, and we'd like people to do things in their lives, right? So no matter how small, to try and be acting in accordance to what we believe is needed. And there are people organizing and people acting. So a couple of ways to help. I mean, firstly, please can we support our speakers? So as you guys pop your links in the chat, your links, your websites, your songs. This is the link for Salah's book. You know, we all want to work towards a future where we can achieve this end. You know, whether that's Huda's campaigning to lift the ban, or the non-violent action of Angie and Shel. Let us know how to support you guys in the chat. There's new music from you, Diz. Do you want to share something in the chat about that, about your single Normal? You know, that's different, right? But it's important. We need to mobilize people. We need to share stories that need to be told. Salah's book, as I've linked, it can be purchased in the chat. You can find a contact form in there. You can send money directly and send an email to Salah, who will share the digital version of the book with you. Secondly, you know, we would also like you to express your support for the People's Charter in the simplest way possible. It will literally take you a moment. You can add your name to the Charter petition. So almost 200 years ago, millions of working people signed the original Charter petition. That caused a monumental shift in the way that democracy is done and rights are won. And you can add your name and your name to support the strength of the People's Charter today, and help build the cause for a permanent House of the People to provide a different vision of the country we want to be living in, to fill the gap. There's lots of strategic reasons why the House is valuable. You know, that's partly to increase the to fill the vacuum of trust in our and credibility in our political system as it stands. But as Shel said, you know, we shouldn't overestimate the impact of a petition, right? We're just trying to find ways to signal to everyone that, like, the vast majority of people want to live in a very different country to the one that's reflected not just by our politicians in parliament, but also by our media and news and the sort of scope of ideas that actually people want to live under. So yeah, please click the link in the chat, houseofthepeople.uk/take action, add your name, find more ways to amplify the charter, whether that's by funding the movement or organising assemblies with Assemble or where you live, printing posters to make it visible, or writing basically to the people with the power so that it's on their radar. There's a little tool that you can use to sort of, in about 2 minutes, have a fully functional, detailed letter that isn't going to just sort of skim over a politician's head, at least make it register with them. So there are lots of things to do. We want to really, really affirm the support. Angie's got a book called Activism for Life. Please check that out. Follow everyone on socials, and that is the end of the call. Thank you all so much. We're so happy to be amongst others who want to come at this moment to talk about things that are meaningful in history and make a real change. So yeah, thank you for everyone. I'm like loving all of the emojis. So let's all say a big thank you to the time and the work of Angie and Huda and Salah and Diz and Shel and Leigh. Please, legends. Thank you all so much. And you may receive an email from us in the next steps, so please do. But all right, thank you all so much. That's your lot. Thanks for coming tonight, and have a lovely rest of your evening.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Feel free to unmute, say hi, say bye.
Diolch yn galon. Thank you from the heart. You're beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Should we stop the recording?
We probably should, yes.